Icy's Druid lined up, and importantly against Demon Hunter. Even if you just eat a singular Moarg and not Il'gynoth itself, which is immediately game winning, it can have a big effect on how that game plays out. Against Mage, not only does Vanessa be more useful because Mutinous has less targets, but also Vanessa is just kind of important to copy burn from the Mage in order to race them a lot of the time. We can see from Surrender that he does have a different game plan available though, of just early Octobot, which is very powerful, but we do see a lot of players like skipping that coined out against Mage to play around Devolving Missiles.
Ooh, spicy hand now for Surrender, because you're absolutely correct. Octobot is not the insane insta-win card against Mage, as it often is in other matchups, because they don't play many minions, so it's difficult to proc it by bumping it in. And as you said, Devolving Missiles or Combustion can swiftly deal with it. With this pickup now for Surrender, you very much could go for Coin Octobot though, right? With Guardian Org Merchant into Octobot or Guardian Org Merchant into Neophyte, there's a lot of strong plays that open up.
My first instinct here would be coin Neophyte to deny just the Neophyte being immediately removed by Ruined Orb or also encounter slow, but the difference maker is that Surrender has seen Primordial Studies, right? Which you kind of assume, if it's not the lab partner just dropped down from Alan, is that he just wants to play a minion next turn, which the Octobot denies a little bit better, or at least would give Surrender better ways to capitalize off of it, if it's not Phoenix or Mini Mage. But Alan did pick Mini Mage, I think, which is the best in general in this matchup. Rogue has almost no way of interacting with it unless they can like copy your Mask of Cthulhu and then play that. It's going to have so much persistent value with these Combustions and Ruined Orb from Alan.
So how are these cheap cards going to be sequenced out? Because I'm seeing many plays, all of which seem valid on this turn. But I think they pretty much all revolve around proccing your Octobot with the Org Merchant this turn.
This allows him to get the Neophyte down as well, which is denying Combustion very crucially, and allows Surrender to start pushing some damage, right? Because while Alan can set up this stealth, if he's only clearing 1 minion per turn, then Surrender is still in the lead here. Alan, if he unveils his stealth, Surrender can obviously immediately kill it.
Tough choice there for Surrender, for Alan, because the Mask of Cthulhu is one of the premium cards in the matchup, occasionally as a board clear, but ideally as just a Pyroblast, 10 damage to the face that makes it very difficult for your opponent to heal out of range. But clearly Alan's hand, clunky, expensive, and he just goes with the Flurry instead, just to be able to try and slow down some of the damage.
Yeah, that is a very, I think, disciplined choice here. Realizing that a lot of the time you cannot play Mask on curve against Rogue because they are just a little bit too fast for you. The Flurry pickup is very effective against Golem boards if he is expecting that at any point in the near future. It's annoying that there's these 2 minions in the way to really get that Flurry to do anything relevant, but for Surrender, I still expect just the Kazakas to come down on curve here, even though the 5-cost Golem is still a little bit of a ways off. The alternate line of Foxy Fraud Swindle Octobot is also very valid, but then you're not really discounting anything too impactful, right? I kind of like the idea of the Golem Shaper and then potentially taking that next turn to discount the Golems with the Octobot, which allows you to then play Golems with something else.
Okay, I think I had the option there of freeze, deal damage, or +2/+2. You'd have to imagine that the buff would be the more impactful one, but Alan rips and then plays the Deck of Lunacy off the top. So we are in for yet another Alan870806 Deck of Lunacy game. Let's see what he's got in store for us.
Is 87806 just the cost of spells in his deck right now? It all starts to make sense. Surrender picking up Swindle is a pretty above average draw to get full value off of the Foxy Fraud discounts, and can continue the discount with seconds, or sorry, the card draw with second Swindle. Then he can just drop the Octobot at worst, and it's fully spent mana, which I am always on board for. I don't think there's any rush to like discount the Octobot this turn because the Golem is already playable next turn.
It's true that the real thing that I'm looking at is actually just the fact that you get more minions on board, you get a Divine Shield in play just to make it that little bit more difficult for your opponent to clear the board. Because if you do have this Golem with +2/+2, you want to make it as awkward, as difficult as possible for your opponent to actually clear your board.
It's very true. So you might even put the Og Merchant... Okay, now that he's drawn 2 more cards off of the Swindle, then he does put the Frenzy effect on the Octobot, of course. I was looking at the line of not necessarily stepping the Foxy Fraud and then just getting the Swindle down that way, but Surrender, by playing the Shadow Step, gets the full board and the card draw and develops a lot of minions into the Golem. So I think this checks all the boxes. But now, Cycle of Hatred from Alan. You were talking about the specific card at the beginning of the day.
Yep. I mean, it's just the absolute stone-cold cocoa nuts against Rogue. There is very little they can do to fight back against this. And Surrender knows it. The Flurry as well, as it turns out, a premium pick, because now this Golem, which Alan will very much be expecting to be +2/+2, does not even allow for the clear double combustion next turn. You'd have to imagine will deal with most, if not all, of these minions. And then Surrender is in a rough spot.
Still think he has to play the Golem just so the Octobots aren't value traded. He can also just Wicked Stab one of these away. Obviously, he's in a terrible position, but if from this point onward Alan draws kind of dead, there's, you know, possibilities that it's whiffs from the Lunacies at this point, but like Surrender knows it's not a likelihood, but that's his way back into the game, is if the Octobots aren't cleanly traded into, and then he can get maybe a good field contact turn rolling.
Alright, so Golem in the middle. Man, Surrender just always gets this positioning right. Something I always forget as Rogue, but I feel like he has rarely, if ever, made a slip up around these. And now he's not necessarily behind on board anymore. Alan has to take 1 foot off the... 1 turn with the foot off the gas here. But next turn, he goes full speed once again. And he's not in a car. He's on 4 rhinos at the same time, Jean-Claude Van Damme style.
I don't even think he had a bad turn. Yes, he had to clear some minions, but he got an optimistic ogre out of it.
Sure.
Surrender with a hope and a prayer off of this field contact. First draw is a whiff. Searching for Pride Splendor. Okay. Okay. Foxy's good.
Yeah, these are good. This is a good passage.
Yeah. Foxy Prize is clear, right?
Care to make a wager, friend?
Aw, Surrender's just praying that it's nothing good follow-up for Alan, but it's the best possible one from the Grand Slam.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They don't go face. Admittedly here for Alan, it's not like the best possible play ever. I mean, it might even just be, yeah, combustion he goes for instead to clear up the board and then go for the slam. Quite like this.
Yeah, to deny the worst case scenario of like 2 Rhinos going into the Golem. He leaves a 5/1 on board, which is a little bit awkward though.
Is it possible to play around that if he'd gone... Oh, no, because the position, he would have left either a 5/1 or a 3/1 and a 5/1, I think, in the other way. 3/1 and a 2/1, sorry.
I don't know if Surrender was thinking about even double positioning combustion, but it worked out very nicely for him.
Yeah.
Now the Jandis is a way to refill the board, and crucially, the Golem gets to go face for another 5 damage. So even though this looked amazing for Alan, we're getting into the territory where some discovered spells... Oh! Neophyte instead.
Ooh, Potion of Illusion. That Golem is premium to send back to your hand, right? If you can stick a board.
It's kind of ambitious to hope that a board will stick with this little health on it, but that might be Surrender's avenue back. I think prioritizing the Neophyte this turn is also super interesting. Maybe he made the read that there wasn't one of the 7-cost spells in hand because Alan would have ripped it last turn. We can see that a Grand Slam still playable even with the Neophyte next turn.
Okay, I like this line. Getting another Neophyte. Even if this board doesn't stick, you can just play all your 1-cost minions and buff them up again next turn to make it a bit tougher.
I mean, even though Surrender wasn't necessarily expecting exactly a Grand Slam, it's a clever deviation to just rely on Neophyte because Surrender's just kind of saying this board gets there with incremental damage. I have 1 Thieves to give potential burst discovers and still the other Wicked Stab in the deck. He's just saying he doesn't need Jandis here. As it turns out, this board will get picked apart by the runic carvings. And the overload still allows Alan to play the Grand Slam next turn, so it's still scary for Surrender, but the incremental damage is piling up.
But it doesn't allow him to play it next turn, right? Because Surrender is almost always going to play Neophyte on this turn, right? Given that it costs 1 mana. And so I do kind of question this play from Alan. He still has the possibility of just going Arcane Intellect next turn, but you had to expect that in a Grand Slam is not going to be playable next turn.
It's quiet. Too quiet.
Oh, Surrender's gonna start the train with the Neophyte. Another flurry. Good. Oh, there's the Wicked Stab. Big deal.
Whoa! Just freeze the board for the rest of the game. Nothing's moving.
Now can he get the Shattered new spell, the one that destroys all frozen minions?
Yeah. That'd be pretty sick.
I guess it's just another flurry, right? The Shooting Star is just a little bit awkward to maneuver such that something actually dies and then he freezes the rest of the board. And then preload the Golem. Keeps the train rolling, makes the board more difficult to remove for Alan. Gets that Brain Freeze clutch there, so Alan can deal no damage with minions next turn.
It's looking rough for Alan. Can't play the Slam, needs to find something better for 3 mana, and given that every card in his deck is more expensive as well, Party Up as the new Paladin spell to summon a bunch of adventurers, I think we know is unlikely to be good enough.
He does get Taunt on 2 of them, but you're right, that is just not good enough. Surrender just has lethal with 2 trades, 9 damage to face, and 1 Wicked Stab to the face. Very cleanly executed. I thought Alan was going to win this from the second he drew Cycle of Hatred, but Surrender managed to navigate it off the back of copied Golem, deviating from Jandice on what looked like a premium turn to play her, and the Neophyte on the board kind of just denying Alan from getting a clean Grand Slam because he was on too low of a health total to risk any of the Rhinos not hitting minions.
It's just what I was saying. Surrender just does not give you an inch when you're playing against his Miracle Rogue. You have to be playing perfectly and honestly getting pretty lucky as well with the draws, because even though we saw the, I think correctly played, you and I can agree, deck of Lunacy on turn 4, still did not turn out to be enough. I think for Alan, I still do quite heavily question his decision to go for the runic carvings instead of the Grand Slam, just because of the expected ability next turn for the Grand Slam to not be played. I appreciate that it was an immediately weaker turn overall, but you have to consider what your opponent can do next turn. And in this instance, Alan just was not reactive enough.
Very tight game there. I also want to go back and look at the double combustion turn. Yes, he did leave, I think, minimum damage on board. That also removed the field contact, but definitely many different complicated ways of kind of iterating it. Surrender's positioning also just made that very difficult for Alan, but really the stroke of genius was that Potion of Illusion, which you identified copied not only the Golem for buffs, but a second Neophyte, which is super relevant when the Lunacy deck is on 2 cards and you expect them to have to draw to do anything impactful. You're kind of like doubling up on the mana disruption at that point. Not the end of the world for Alan though, because this entire lineup is built to beat up on Priest in the first place.
That's right, Weapon Rogue, Miracle Rogue, I keep calling it Weapon Rogue. Miracle Rogue is a bit of a disaster deck for Alan overall. I'd say the Control Warrior can probably beat it fairly handily, but even then there's a pretty greedy build of the Control Warrior, again with Cthulhu, Ysera as well at the top. And the double South Sea Scoundrel as well does not necessarily help the matchup. But against the likes of Priest, this has proven to be a very formidable deck against Glory's Control Priest. Things might be a little bit different for Surrender, however, who does have the Cthulhu in his own priest. First of all, though, before we get into any of that, it is going to be the Rush Warrior for Surrender that he's going against Alan's Control Warrior. And this is a debate that you and I had a couple weeks ago before Wailing Caverns was even entered into the equation of can Control Warrior have enough removal to fight back against the likes of Rush Warrior. The deck has changed a lot since then. You're not running the likes of Rattlegore as the late game finisher anymore, relying on N'Zoth instead. But do you think this is going to be a good matchup or a bad matchup for Surrender straight up?
I think it's pretty decent still on average if you are able to hit at least one conditioning. I think, especially in the hands of a skilled Rush Warrior that looks to put like 2 to 3 threats on board, not go super wide and not just play a single minion that dies to Blade Storm, then you can maneuver it in such a way where the Control Warrior has to use their removal in awkward ways. I think another important point is not just feeding them Outrider's Axe targets. If you can help it, like a Parade Leader for tempo or Playmaker is just not something you can do in this matchup because it's oftentimes a net negative to just give the Control Warrior more card draw. I think Surrender, especially with this N'Zoth build, has a lot more value packed into this as well, but it's a bit interesting to see N'Zoth without the Crush in this list. Instead, he's running 2 Scorpids to fill out the Beast curve, but the one universal cut we're seeing from Rush Warrior is the Warmaul Challengers disappeared from all the lists.
Yeah, that does make some amount of sense. I think as we saw more and more, as the aggro decks fell by the wayside, I think Warmaul Challenger became a lot less impactful. It was really good against the aggro Paladins that we saw with the aggro Secret Paladin, Face Hunter as well, whereas now a lot less impactful. But I do agree. I think that you had to have a pretty strong opinion while you were testing to not include Kresh. It's not like Kresh was this wacky tech inclusion that people think, oh, this might actually be good. Like, Kresh, you just look at it and you think, this is a strong card. So Surrender clearly having some experience with testing, you'd have to imagine, and coming to the conclusion that in his Rush Warrior, not quite worth it because of, I guess, its overall low attack value for the cost, you would assume. But I do think personally I like the builds with N'Zoth and Kresh.
Bit interesting to see Scorpid in the list if you are arguing for like higher attack minions, though, because Scorpid is quite low pressure. You can say in certain matchups like the Mirror, it's pretty good to have that poisonous tag. And honestly, there's not that many spells you want to discover as Rush Warrior, because we're seeing Scorpid and Control Warrior because Warrior has a lot of removal in their arsenal that Control Warrior is always happy to snap up more of. Whereas something like Shield Slam, Minefield might feel out of place for Rush Warrior. So I'm super excited to see how the Scorpids actually play out for Surrender, because they would not be top of my list in terms of what to sub out for Warmaul Challenger.
Well, here we go. Surrender holding on to the conditioning makes sense, given that this is expected to be a very greedy playstyle that you would employ against Control Warrior. And Alan finding himself Scorpid to get things going. Not much else as of yet, though. But that's the way it often feels as Control Warrior. You really just going to be removing for the vast majority of the game.
Good for Alan that he does get that Scorpid start, though, at least in terms of having something to develop. Okay, Athletic Studies picked up for Surrender is a way to spend his mana, because I really don't think you should be just tempoing out Parade Leader in this matchup, and for that same reason, Crab Rider without Parade Leader feels very low pressure and not worth it, especially since he has this conditioning. So it's between Hero Power or just Athletic Studies here for Surrender, but what do I know? Parade Leader comes down early.
Yeah, I think this one was really quite close, because before you hit specifically Outrider's Axe, I suppose there are actually quite limited ways to actually deal with this Parade Leader, and so if it just does a bit of chip damage at the start, that's kind of about the best you can expect it to do. Again, as you said, if you can buff it up to a 4-5 or even a 6-7, something like that later on, that is tempting. But just getting in the chip damage to keep the armor total down for the fear of Shield Slam is worth a fair bit in the matchup.
It's true. And in terms of playing around Outrider's Axe, I was about to make the argument that Parade Leader on 2, even though it like doesn't immediately walk into Outrider's Axe, if it sticks for the next turn, then the Axe gets a target. But the thing is, Surrender started with Gunarg, so there was already going to be a guaranteed target. So Surrender is just going for curve options here, puts more pressure with the Crab Rider, probably takes Outrider here as the highest value card.
Yeah, you'd think so, unless there's any synergy that you can pull off later on with Sky Talon, just because of how cheap it is, you know, with ETC or Playmaker. But I would agree with you. My inclination is to say also Outrider, biggest guy, it's a greedy matchup.
All a bit awkward in terms of how his turn 4 lines up, because he's really just trying to fill that gap before he goes for the conditioning here. Takes another Crab Rider, which makes sense if he is just going to play 2 more minions next turn. However, I'd be very concerned about what role the conditioning actually has at that point, if it's only buffing like 1 or 2 minions. But in the meantime, Surrender could have drawn something like Stage Dive, Athletic Studies, Second Copy, or like Watley ideally. He has put forth all this early minion pressure to make it awkward for Alan in the early game. Remains to be seen if that will be enough towards the late game without the conditioning buffs, but Surrender is hoping that his next draws will give him a bit more value.
Could see him mousing over Rancor at least, which is definitely where my head is at if you're going to play anything on this turn. I could definitely understand just hero power passing, setting up for a brawl. Or just playing Stage Dive, I suppose, as well, to spend your mana. But playing the Rancor does, of course, have some amount of benefit to set up for Minefield next turn. But he does take the more conservative approach in the end. Alan has shown no qualms whatsoever about playing this in a very reserved playstyle, as we saw against the Priest. And I think correctly so, carrying that over to against the Rush Warrior as well, where you have to be greedy with your removal options.
And I think this quite cleverly sets up for something like Bladestorm into Minefield instead, because while Surrender has set up 2, 3, 4 health, the whole board, at least if nothing gets added, will take 2 damage to each minion off of a Bladestorm. And if Surrender does play like a relatively low health minion, which is likely on 4 mana, then he can still clean that up with Bladestorm Minefield. Field of Honor is interesting, but Commencement is just the greed line, which might be just the way to go against Control Warrior.
It's kind of the greed line. I mean, it doesn't actually add much value to your deck, right? And I think, you know, if you're paying 7 mana for even a 5-drop light off of Runthak, it's still a little underwhelming. So I think Shield of Honor for a more aggressive line makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. I was already thinking about pulling Crash or like Troublemaker, but there's already one Troublemaker in hand, so Shield of Honor a lot more disciplined to take, especially since his rush minions will be able to damage themselves a lot of the time. But here it is, the Bladestorm Minefield nicely sweeps up this board without having to use a Brawl from Alan, so that first wave of threats from Surrender has been checked, and this is my concern, conditioning not hitting too many minions might make it difficult for Surrender to get over the line here.
That is true. It's looking a little rough for him unless he can find Watley. But even having said that, he has the ETC now to push a fair bit of extra damage in the coming turns. Coin Troublemaker is, of course, what he is gearing up for. And as it currently stands, Alan could struggle with that. There's a lot of draws that make that a lot more amenable. But if, for example, Brawl leaves up the Troublemaker at the end of the turn, I think this is still a very winnable game for either player.
Yeah, definitely seems so. For Alan this turn, the Crush looks just like a decent minion on curve. Yes, it's dead on board, but if it takes 8 damage to deal with it, you're fine with that. And if it gets left up, then it can help soften things for Rancor. And at some point, it's just going to give Alan 8 armor. Oh, but sorry, forgot that the Kargath was actually buffed by the Stage Dive, so that's a lot cleaner.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, honestly, I was still considering the Crash just to try and set up for a Rancor later on, but agreed. In the end, the Kargath probably a little cleaner. And honestly, just getting it in the deck is a big deal because you want to at some point start putting some pressure on the Rush Warrior.
This is about to be a very miserable turn 6 for Surrender, which often is the case with this deck. It still feels like a pretty lackluster one because he hasn't hit any like high health that also have persistent attack rush minions. Probably just the Pearl Tusk here.
Yeah, I'm looking most heavily at the Pearl Tusk just because it does anything, but Rustied Raider, I mean, again, you've just seen Kargath, so the rush minions are not likely to be there. Weapon swings, you haven't seen the weapon either. So just taking the most just the highest attack option off of the Pearl Tusk. I would probably play it on this turn as well, but there's even the possibility to just save it for Troublemaker.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. Just corrupt it and go for a bit more greed later on. I feel like 4-4 is still easily within the range that it can be dealt with. Obviously, Surrender takes a very slow turn here. So, looks like he is just going to go for the Pearl Tusk and make sure he's playing down threats every single turn. Even the Rider feels like a bit lackluster because he has ETC in hand, but Surrender has consistently shown that he just wants to make sure he's spending his mana as efficiently as possible. Doesn't feel like he can get there with the ultimate greed in the late game.
Crash here going to be a nightmare for Surrender leading into the Troublemaker turn, you would imagine, because if he ignores it, then of course the 3/3s are likely to just proc its Frenzy and not do much damage face, but if he attacks in, he's losing most of his board, everything's going to die to Brawl or Rancor or something like that. It's just a brutally strong play here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a way that he can maneuver it such that he kills the Crush in one fell swoop. If he could put some damage on like a 10 Trasher and then put Shield of Honor on it, but it's just not happening, so... It feels like this could just be 10 Trasher and the 4/4 into Crush to kill it. And everything else face.
I agree. I think this is definitely an ETC turn is the important thing here, because you're playing way too heavily into Brawl if you're a Troublemaker. That is your follow-up threat, whereas this is already threatening enough.
And he realizes there's not many draws in the near future if it's not exactly Watley, and so just cashing out the rush damage while he can. All 3 of these minions that have yet to attack are also just pushing another 2 damage. Don't think it's worth playing the other Rider for another 2, but we'll see.
I don't know. I was tempted by it. I guess you can, again, save it for second conditioning. If it gets to +3/+3, then that does become at least a somewhat threatening minion.
Nice optimization from Surrender to not take the trade here on the 1/3 instead, because leaving that on board doesn't actually give Alan better breakpoints for Blade Storm. But against Brawl, it's all the same. Or not! It leaves the 1 in 5 that Alan gets the best possible outcome.
Yep, that's a tough one to swallow as Surrender. But that's the way it goes sometimes, why you're including Brawl in your deck. Watley off the top, however, is the card for Surrender to find if he was going to have any chance. Obviously, you go Troublemaker first to present the immediate threat, but that as a backup is monstrous in terms of the follow-up.
And the chip damage that Surrender got throughout the start of the game is very relevant to deny just a clean shield slam here. I think Alan can still maneuver it, though, with like swing into a 3/3. Rancor, Hero Power. Oh, sorry, that's a little bit short, right? Yeah, that would leave the Troublemaker at 2 health.
Swing, Shield Maiden, Hero Power also a little short. So we are looking at Brawl here, but then what happens if you miss? It's actually pretty disastrous if you do miss the Brawl.
Yeah, that I think is a bit of a nightmare. So Singular Troublemaker turns out is the exact size of board that Warrior struggles, or Control Warrior struggles to deal with. We could see like Shield Maiden and then Hero Power and then Shield Slam to soften the Troublemaker and then go for a double Rancor the next turn, but he takes so much damage in the meantime that he's going for the 2 and 3 good outcome of Brawl.
And it's the best possible outcome in the 1 in 5 and the 1 in 3 twice in a row off Brawl. Probably looking at just taking Bumper Car because you'd much rather deny threats to your opponent than generate them yourself.
Yep. Has that added effect of -1 draw from the Watley as well for Surrender.
True.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be amazed.
That Scoundrel's actually such a problem for Surrender at the moment. It cleanly trades Watley and the Sword Eater.
Yeah, straight up 4 mana 5/5 is just a very powerful body and difficult for Surrender to find an answer to.
Sword Eater and Swing Face is where my first instinct would be, and then the Scoundrel takes the expected trade into Sword Eater, and then you can swing into it the next turn, if not deal with it using some type of bumper car token turn. Maybe he doesn't swing altogether because he's not really threatening lethal at the moment. Alex not drawn. Nuzot's still a bit deeper in the deck.
They cannot stop my work.
Pointing out the Gnarg to get it in play, which means the weapon comes down a bit earlier. I definitely respect that. There's nothing he's saving the coin for at this point.
And now just taking the board clears here is Alan starting to lock down the board, getting in the position that you really want to be in as Control Warrior against Rush Warrior, where you are not just removing, but getting ahead. This is, I think, what the Rattle Goreless version often lacks, or even what the Nuzothless version lacks, as Alan has here. With Cthulhu being his big late game finisher is way too slow for it to ever come into effect against Rush Warrior. And so if you just make things awkward for them, get ahead on board, then you have a chance of taking the matchup. But even then, I think you could very much argue that Surrender is just in the lead at this point.
In terms of the value game, actually, I do agree with you, especially with this Playmaker top deck allows him to get a lot more tokens. They feel not that strong without conditioning nor ETC, but it's a way to stave off this board, right? And then Alan just hasn't drawn Outriders Axe this entire time, which means that his top decks are very, very slow.
Get some pretty sick play with Shield of Honor actually being active now, thanks to Playmaker summoning damaged versions of the minions, which is kind of cool.
I wonder if it's relevant, though.
Oh, you just sack it in. Okay, fair enough.
Because putting the shield on that, I mean, you would also trade into the bumper car on the other side, you have to imagine, which means that there's just going to be tokens for Alan to trade away the shielded low health minion. He can shield the 5-4 next turn, though.
Oh man, it's
trades to leave nothing within range of Rancor as well, but with the tokens into Rancor, Alan can stabilize.
still just such a close one. Double Rancor is like a possibility, I guess. Double Dark Moon, trade, swing to clear the board with a Rancor is also a consideration. That would allow you to finish with the Scoundrel, I suppose.
Yeah, I quite like the sound of that. The Scoundrel is good board presence, but honestly is actively bad for Alan in this matchup where Surrender is also just top decking and you don't want to be drawing Surrender any card, even if it's a bad card, because it's one card less in the deck that gets Surrender closer to N'Zoth and Alexstrasza. And, you know, even second conditioning might still be a little bit relevant at this point. However, Alan cannot afford to take this damage every single turn.
Yeah, this is a board that must be cleared. You can, at that point, just pray that they don't find conditioning, because if they get a dead card here, you just have to stick the 1/1 Dark Moon Riders in their hand. That's fine. You can just Rancor those away, and you're very, very happy. But one good top deck from Surrender could turn this all around.
Oh, that's one of them. That's going to get back Scorpid, Bumper Car, Tent Trasher, and a Gnarg, I believe. And a Crab Rider?
Pyra as well.
And a Pyra. Oh my gosh, it doesn't all fit.
Just too much stuff.
Whew. Okay. Ooh.
Misses on the
That
beast.
is powerful.
But still, as you said, a brutally powerful turn. Alan needs to find something off of this South Sea Scoundrel, but with no removal in the deck. Are you looking for, I don't know, Scorpid to discover your own removal spell?
I don't know.
Yeah. I guess.
Good a
Brawl
chance
for
as
next
any
turn.
stay alive with the coerces. Currently, he knows that Alexstrasza has not been in hand off of the Watley because he's seen all of the draws from the Watley played.
Yep.
But at any point, that is very, very scary. Second Troublemaker scary. Conditioning scary. Buddies versus Surrender as well. The value never stops.
He's first of all counting if there's lethal with Whirlwind into Shield of Honor, I think. Again, I can't see in order to count, but my guess would be it's still a little short.
Definitely worth thinking about. Like, he can keep a Whirlwind in his back pocket in order to activate that Shield of Honor, but I really favor just the studies getting more value right now. I think the way Surrender loses is not being a little bit short of damage, but there being, like, say, second Brawl into Rancor to deal with the tokens, and then him running out of threats. But Rokara now.
Rokara is so sick. Look at the raw amount of stats that affords you on this turn. Has to be worth it, right?
I think it's definitely the pick. I just wonder if she needs to be played this turn. Oh, okay, never mind. This is a cleaner use of his mana, gets him a faster way to deal with the 5/5. But I was thinking the Rokara potentially comes down on the next board. If this one gets answered, then it gives Surrender a way to actually refill with relevant threats.
Sure.
Because if this board isn't answered, Surrender's already just winning. And I guess the 5/3 just compounds that problem a little bit more.
Oh, conditioning Corsair Cash stage dive.
The Prime's too expensive to play off
Yeah.
a stage dive this turn, but can he survive with Rancor and Shield Slam?
I think he can, right? Because the only really high attack minion is that Blood Boil Brutes. You can go Rancor, Hero Power, Shield Slam, and then next turn stage dive and get the Prime, but then there's still a poison in play, annoyingly.
I think he worries about that another day, right? The Prime gives him 10 armor and time to play with. I think he takes a stage dive here. The Outrider, Corsair Cash getting Outriders is just not relevant at this point in the game. He can't point it at any minions that it actually kills right now.
Oh yeah, sure, Hero Power, Shield Slam, and then Rancor is better order. But even so, it's gonna keep him alive for a turn, I think, right? But not much more than that as it currently stands, as Alexstrasza is creeping closer and closer every single turn.
11 damage as I counted for Surrender, including Shield of Honor. And obviously the Sword Eater takes a while, the second one in hand, I mean, to get its damage through, but it's still relevant, right? 4 swings of Fiery War Axe. I don't think Surrender needs to play anything here. If anything, maybe just Shield of Honor.
Oh man, he's going to be thinking through what could it possibly have been. Like if it was second Rancor, they wouldn't have been able to play it right because Scorpid chewed up 3 of the mana. So could still be another Rancor that you want to play around by not going for too many 1/1s. Could of course be Brawl that you're afraid of.
I love how Surrender always just swings face first or attacks with nose are going face first and then figure out the rest later. It's like a small way to make sure you don't rope out more of the time.
That's true. It's a good thing to do.
It's gonna chuck 1 Rider into the Scorpid. You'd have to imagine he was just thinking about, does trading ever help me against Bladestorm here? And he realized it's just not worth the 1 damage he would miss, because he's just getting to the point where even without Alexstrasza, he's killing Alan. And crucially, the Divine Shield on the taunt is making the Kargath Prime unplayable this turn.
So sick.
He would have to like armor up and then swing, but he wouldn't have the mana to play stage dive into Kargath Prime. That was so cool there at the end from Surrender.
What a clever play. I mean, even I would be surprised if he had the read on stage dive because there's nothing really to go on. But of course, he's still afraid of top deck Prime to be able to swing back into the game. And so saving him right until the end, that use of the Shield of Honor, which we'd seen picked on like, what, turn 3 it was earlier on in the game, is such a clever utilization, locking out any outs from Alan. And again, these little flourishes that we've come to expect from Surrender that pull him into being what is often considered the best player in Asia Pacific. 2-0 up now against Alan. He's won with both of his non-priest decks in the Rush Warrior and the Rogue, which admittedly Alan was kind of expecting to happen. This is a good spot for Surrender, but it's not a perfect spot for Surrender. Alan still has that priest left over that he is trying to 3-0 with his remaining 3 archetypes.
However, not only is Priest, which means it has ways of scamming the game, like Glory did with the copied Ticketuses, but Surrender's Priest has Cthulhu in it, which means that it has a built-in way of trying to not necessarily guaranteed win against Control Warrior, but keep up with their ability to play Cthulhu themselves. And I also just want to backtrack a bit to that last matchup, because I did say at the beginning I was questioning Surrender's willingness to throw out minions without conditioning value, but watching the way that panned out, just like not giving Alan the armor to get a very effective shield slam in the mid game and keeping them within range of Alex Straza threatening lethal towards the end there was very clever from Surrender. So even though the matchup did go the way I expected, the way Surrender played opened my eyes to a new way to make it favored for the Rush Warrior.
A whole new world. For the Control Priest, though, here for Surrender, a relatively greedy build overall, given that a lot of the lists I've seen have cut a lot of, or all, of the top end, I will say. Obviously cutting the N'Zoth package, which I think is the premier ladder version of the deck at the moment, but does give himself a fair few extra tools that I think work very well in a tournament setting. You know, if you are looking for a Control Priest to play on ladder, I would recommend taking a closer look at the Japanese players version. I think that suits you a little bit better for what is a more aggressive field. But here, if you are against the likes of Alan in particular, then you are very much afraid of the idea of these control killer lineups, and so having Mutinous, having Cthulhu in there as well, as even Ysera could be a big deal. I think Surrender has given himself as good a chance as any of taking down this Rush Warrior, because now the extra 4 cards that the Cthulhu gave Alan in the previous series against Glory, which delayed fatigue for those 4 extra turns, is now cancelled out. So I think the fatigue game plan, as you were saying Alan didn't have a chance of in the previous series, didn't turn out to be correct there. Here, I think the fatigue game plan for Alan is a lot harder to achieve.
Absolutely. And I think just the way that Surrender has built the Priest is kind of good knowledge of how to approach Conquest, right? Where Priest is universally considered the strongest deck, and everybody's going to bring it because it has tools to beat aggro, it has tools to beat combo with Elucia there, and then now we see Surrender having the tools to beat control that goes for fatigue, realizing that if my Priest is going to be left up, it's very possibly by the type of lineup that Alan is running. And so he's got the Cthulhu in there and the Southeast Scoundrel to make sure he is keeping pace with the fatigue timer. Southeast Scoundrel kept in the opener, and admittedly in a matchup that's as even in terms of card draw like this, you'd really rather be on the play to have 1 less card in the opening hand.
Alan as well, you love to see it, getting out the notepad and the 4-color Bic, ready to take some old school notes here on these control matchups, which I think is very smart. It's kind of a lost art in the era of online Hearthstone, as opposed to the tournament setting where nowadays you are allowed deck tracker while you're playing in Grandmasters, while you're playing in the Masters Tours, when you're playing on stage in the old HCT or in the Master Tours before we switched to an online variant of Hearthstone. You did have to be good at taking notes. You had to cross off all the cards that your opponent has played, and Alan employing some of that old school Hearthstone play here, which I like to see.
It's also because Deck Tracker is not infallible. Even our own tracker sometimes bugs out with the ranked cards. Cthulhu pieces can get very, very messy when both people are running it, and you can copy them with Southeast Scoundrel. Which ones did I draw? Which ones did I discover? How many Raise Deads has the Priest played? How many Raise Deads has the Priest generated? There's a lot of things that even if the tracker can keep order of it, it's just not the most organized compared to like writing it down sometimes. And so Alan taking any percentage where you can, you love to see it. I hope we got this disconnect issue solved there, because Surrender did have an option to take Initiation, which we've already seen be very relevant to copy Kargaths and get more cards into the deck.
Yeah, definitely one of the premier options. There's just so much redundancy in Priest with these copy effects, these greed effects that allow you to get multiple Kargath Primes played, multiple, I don't know, Primordial Drakes later on, if you're going for the, Draconic Studies to be able to go for that game plan as well. Overall, though, it does seem to be still a good situation for Surrender on the Priest. I think he will continue to be well in the lead in this matchup.
I don't think the other options have very much merit because, again, Alan is playing a very little threats until the late game, and it's really not about playing with the cards on board here, but the cards in hand and in deck when it comes to these slow, grindy matchups. Outrider's Axe can be equipped for Alan, and he can start drawing. And because Surrender is keeping pace with fatigue here, maybe Alan is just trying to get to his own Cthulhu a bit sooner, knowing that at any point he could be under threat of a Cthulhu coming back the other way.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Alan will completely switch up his game plan here when against the Cthulhu Priest as opposed to the N'Zoth Priest that we saw from Glory, because now going for the Turbo Cthulhu as quick as possible is probably his best chance of taking the win, because with both the South Sea Scoundrels available to surrender and, more importantly, Raised Dead to replay multiple South Sea Scoundrels, it's just unlikely that you're going to be able to keep up in fatigue.
As for what Surrender might want to have another copy of, the Brawl is where my head would be at, but honestly, all of these are quite terrible because they're all removal options that Alan is hardly ever playing threats, right? Maybe it's Silas just because it's the most easily dumpable card that actually does something on board for Surrender.
Yeah, I mean, look at that tempo. A 7-mana 4/4. Pure value.
Yeah. And Surrender, crucially, played out the South Sea Scoundrel, even knowing that Alan was not going to overdraw at that point. I think noting that Alan is never going to leave himself on 8 cards or more if he can help it, right? So Surrender's just trying to keep his own hand as streamlined as possible as he moves toward his own Cthulhu.
Well, now Surrender is at that 8-card point where you don't want to be drawing any more cards. You don't want to be allowing yourself to go up to 9 cards, because again, more so than ever in this matchup, you never want to go above 8 cards at the end of your turn because of the South Sea Scoundrel into overdraw a Cthulhu piece possibility. But not too much of a concern for the moment. Surrender's still in that safe zone as of yet. And again, that factor does play into this choice again, because both Ysera and Onyx Mage Scribe make it very difficult to keep your hand economy low. So Surrender takes the, you know, for the most part, worse dragon when compared to the other two, just because he wants to keep as few cards in hand as possible.
Yeah, I think it's very heads up. There was still room to think about taking the Mage Scribe if he, for example, played out Samuro for tempo this turn. But because the rest of his cards like that are cheap generate even more stuff, these renews, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to maneuver. The Kargath being buffed by Stage Dive is a pain for Surrender because he can't just initiate this to get a copy. So we could see something like the Dragon Maw set up here to potentially damage the Kargath into initiation, but it's kind of ambitious to hope that the Kargath actually takes damage from that.
No, that's true. I mean, you could dig with the Renews instead of the Dragon Maw to try and find Holy Smite for the next turn, or to try and pre-damage it now with a Condemn, for example. But kind of just looking more heavily at the Maw of Cthulhu here, and then try to get a guaranteed res on the South Sea Scoundrel for next turn.
He could start Renew, and if he finds something like you were mentioning to soften up the Kargath, then deviate from the Maw. And then, but if he doesn't find it, could still play the Maw. But it looks like Surrender is just going to go for the Dragon Maw Skystalker here, preloading the Raised Dead in order to guarantee get the Scoundrel. But that means he's up to 9 cards now, so Alan can play his own Scoundrel.
That's right. He's got the opportunity.
Yeah.
It's a huge turn.
Stuff.
And Alan absolutely going to be leaping at the opportunity to do so.
One for me, one for you.
So probably Smite is the least useful card for Surrender. And I always struggle figuring out the balance of when to take a card that's worse for your opponent versus a card that's decent for you.
Yeah.
Armor, lightly used.
And I think the worst of both worlds is Draconic Studies, right? Because that's worse on average for Alan without like things of Skeletal Drake being in the pool for Warrior. And then just gives Surrender almost certainly something very strong.
Fair enough. But Surrender manages to dodge a bullet there. One Maker, get out of here. We don't care about that at all. It's just the Cthulhu pieces, pretty much, that you are wanting to not burn. But now for Surrender, does need to be, as much as possible, throwing cards out of his hand. He just wants to be turbo deleting cards from his hand here, which is admittedly easier said than done. This is a hand that refuels itself more than it dumps itself.
That's very awkward. Like, the Maw is very possible now on the South Sea Scoundrel because there's no more Kargath to hope to hit with the initiation. There's some argument to playing his own Scoundrel, but then it's very hard to dump cards after that because the only playables are Renew and Scorpid, which, like you said, just refresh themselves in hand. Even Soul Mirror, I don't hate the look of, to just get the most expensive card out, especially since he has seen Kargath, which is the minion you really want to copy off of Soul Mirror, but there's still the possibility of getting Thresh off, Crush off of Soul Mirror. Thresh is from a different card game.
Yeah, Huntrace also kept saying the wrong thing. I was on call with him for like 2 hours yesterday, and I kept trying to correct him, and he was still just like, no, dude, Thresh is insane. Yo.
Oh, I miss Huntrace.
Me too.
Well, if Alan is looking to draw cards at some point, Anchorman helps because the Outrider is honestly kind of hard to activate in the matchup. Surrender won't necessarily dump minions for the Outrider to straight up kill.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to develop the other Scorpid here, still at 8 cards, so it's fine. There are turns where you can position the Scorpid to be a bit awkward for Surrender, such as like right now. Surrender needs to have a way to remove the Scorpid if he also wants to play a big threat and have it stick. And at the moment, there's no Holy Smite for Surrender, so it's kind of awkward.
That's true. I'm kind of looking at Samuro Apo just to delete 2 cards from my hand here. I know it's not a good use of it at all, but it allows you to stick a minion, clear off the Scorpid. I mean, arguably, maybe you're even supposed to just run it into the Scorpid just to deny card draw from your opponent. Like, there's so many different ways that you could try and approach this matchup as to how much you want to deny draw from your opponent versus get some threats of your own online.
Was certainly worth thinking about. I was honestly wondering if there's a specific turn you're supposed to save Samuro Apo for big healing, let's say like post Cthulhu if it doesn't kill Surrender, but then how likely is it that that's actually hitting many minions other than Cthulhu for big healing? And it's just also a trap to save every card in your hand for this turn, that turn in the near future, and then you're kind of dead to the immediate threat because of it. Surrender just going for the initiation, still deleting a card from his hand essentially, like having seen the Kargath, it's kind of hard to maneuver the initiation to actually get him anything relevant, so I think it's fine to throw away. Holy Smite again? Cheap cards? That's a premium.
Yeah, literally anything you can just get rid of. I am looking very, very closely at here. Oh, I just want to get into the position where I can play these Salty Scoundrels again.
Oh, Shadow Form gamers all day.
Kind of surprising. Ooh.
Ike split. He's already seen Kargath, so all these copy spells feel a little bit weaker, but it is the highest value card. Fortitude is the easiest to dump though, so again, I would just look at that.
I honestly don't know. This is a really tough choice. Like, Soul Mirror kind of not that useful in the matchup, and you already have one, so I would kind of write that one off. But the ability to actually copy a big minion with Psych Split is quite difficult, and if you're just copying, I don't know, Scorpids or Sethix, like, it's not an especially high value card.
The Shadow Form has, you know, repeated removal value, which is quite useful for Surrender because he is heading into turns where like Samuro Apo can soften boards but not necessarily clear anything. And it can also remove charges off of Bulwark of Azzinoth, and also just kind of lends itself to the Samuro game plan, right? You give up the hero power that heals you because you have that big healing combination in your back pocket. At the moment, the Shadow Form allows him to get rid of the Shield Maiden with Condemn if he wants to use Condemn on a singular minion. I think it's decent.
No, I agree. I think I'm still somewhat shifting my mindset over from Glory versus the Warrior in the previous series, where in that instance, once it got to Fatigue, you would much rather heal yourself than you would damage the opponent because you're expecting to be taking a lot of damage thanks to Cthulhu. Whereas here, Surrender can take the more aggressive mindset. He has his own Cthulhu. He's not going to be as far behind in Fatigue, so damaging his opponent rather than healing is more likely, I would argue, to be useful. Or I would hear the argument for, at least, given that you made the argument first rather than me.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Even has these renews that he's been saving this entire time because he's not had targets to heal, so he really doesn't need his hero power on top of that, at least in the here and now. Mechtherodon is the draw for Alan, which he can immediately activate with the Blade Storm, but I think we've... Okay, I was going to say, we've established in this matchup that you hardly ever want to play threats just for threats that aren't getting their max value. Like, the Mechtherodon's not removing anything for surrender. But
Yeah.
Alan's just saying, I want a big minion online right now. He does kind of have the hand to support it, to be fair, which is like another Kargath big minion slash Kresh to follow up. And surrender has given up the healing hero power, so Alan's turning up the gas.
He is, and well, he knows at the very least that Surrender has access to Silas because the South Sea Scoundrel drew it earlier on, assuming that his diligent note-taking, which has rapidly fallen off, has been working. But if that happens, then of course he can Silas it back again, and Surrender still needs to find an answer after that point. But just using straight-up Soul Mirror here is a pretty key tool, actually, to be able to fight back against the likes of Kargath Prime.
Yeah, I do like holding onto Soul Mirror because it can get that 7 armor if the Kargath comes down and sticks. Maybe Surrender's thinking that Alan never plays the Kargath unless it immediately dies because of the possibility, but man, there's just so many different things to consider. I think that I would have ended up on Silas myself there, personally. To be fair, Surrender still does have this Psyche split for Kargath Prime, should it come down. And because he has this ping hero power, he can get Kargath on the other side to a lower health total as well.
So Alan has just found a Cthulhu piece, which obviously massively incentivizes you to play it on this turn because of the threat of Elucia. But there's a certain amount of mind games at stake because Surrender, I'm sure, will be keeping track of if a card has just been drawn, has it been played? But if a card that was just drawn hasn't been played, then you can kind of rule it out as being a Cthulhu piece anyway, because they would just play it right out the gate. But Alan not wanting to mess around with any kind of nonsense, just taking the turn to get it down, and then he can develop threats next turn.
I feel like if Elucia ever comes down in this matchup, it either makes the person who plays it look like a complete genius or a complete moron. There's just no in between, right? Because you can say, oh, they had the read that the Cthulhu piece was in hand, but who knows? They might have just been playing it without that strong of a read in the first place. And again, if the Elucia is played and nothing relevant gets dumped, it's just worse for the player that activated it because they get drawn deeper into fatigue, or rather their original deck does.
So Surrender obviously wants to be setting up for some kind of a Sethic turn in the near future. How you go about that is quite difficult because, again, all of his cards seem to replace themselves at the very least. But going for the Psych split here right away could follow up with Apo. That would put him up to 9 cards. But still, given that he's seen South Sea Scoundrel from his opponent, that's not too scary at this point.
Yeah, only one left in the list. More shadow forms? I guess those are like 4 mana deal too at this point, just to refresh hero power. Pretty awful, but you know, at the worst, dumpable cards.
It's true. Do you remember in the good old days when it cost 3? That would be a mind spike now that deals 3 damage each turn.
More importantly, Surrender has developed a board that's of the shape where it's awkward for Warrior to remove. Like, I think Alan doesn't necessarily want to throw out his Kargath Prime because of the threat of something like Soul Mirror copying it. But then, if he uses only a singular Coerce, then you leave 1 Sethic on board, which is still just going to regenerate more value. Sethic are must-remove cards.
Well, interestingly enough, thanks to those shadow forms, Surrender does now have a pretty tidy clear with Condemn double ping, if he wants to clear off the Kargath. But first of all, going to be considering any alternate options. Like, is it worth swapping and then rushing in to the Silas? Like, you could...
Kind of like that, right? You get the 10 armor, and then you can end with Renew on your 10-3.
That's true.
Goes up to 10-6. In terms of best Silas targets, I can't think of any other than Kresh that are better than the Prime minion. And Kresh being better is also just arguable because you can say the Kargath is 10 armor, whereas Kresh is just 8.
Sure. Going with this line instead to give a 2-2 instead of a 4-4 seems like a nice optimization. Can still fit in the renew should he desire.
Yep.
Yes, it is that
Double
way.
check. I've messed that up more times than I care to admit. Not even going to bother with the renew because the Kargath is not dead to Outriders in the first place, and he has Static, so better renew target, sure.
Yeah, and also if it gets stolen back by the opposing Silas, it's kind of good to keep it as low as possible to see you can condemn or hero power it. So I do like, in the end, holding back with this line.
I am just getting dizzy because this Kargath has rotating... Those are not blade fists, is that what they actually are? And then there's a rotating Silas itself.
It's like a ballet, but with chainsaws and mech beasts.
Yeah. Sounds like the kind of ballet you'd attend, Dark.
I have been to the ballet once before. My granddad took me as a kid, and I struggled heavily to pretend to be interested. I'm sorry, Granddad, I can now admit it.
I did ballet for a couple years as a tiny kid. I also struggled to enjoy it.
I could be doing this, but I've got a Squirtle at home that needs evolving.
Well, Alan is going to go for the rotation, gets the 10 armor back, and he is drawing deeper into his deck willingly with the Outrider's Axe. Having ended that turn with not enough mana remaining to play a Cthulhu piece, if Surrender had Elucia this turn, there was some thinking to maybe playing it, but again, the odds of that being exactly a Cthulhu piece are not very high at the moment, and thankfully, at least for us, the Elucia is not in hand at the moment.
Heart of Cthulhu found, instantly played. It's a pretty good spot for it, honestly. You'd probably just go for Condemn if that wasn't in hand anyway.
Oh wow, still not playing a Cthulhu piece when it's drawn. Maybe this is just the mind game, like you expect Surrender to think that Alan would play it, so never gonna be a Lucia, but...
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's so niche that your opponent would be able to get... Like, it's not even a read for you to think that that card is a Cthulhu piece. It's a guess. If Lucia had been in hand all this time and he finally plays it, it would be an absolute guess.
Very true. No way to get that information. Crush played now is very likely just another 8 armor for Alan and the persistent weapon damage. Alan is quite a ways deeper in fatigue though, and it's not like Surrender's under any threat because he has the 16 armor and renews to heal back up.
Well, he of course has Body of Cthulhu, and that would give his opponent a combo piece quicker. So I'm looking at Scorpid here instead.
Yeah, I agree. Infusion is a card that's targeted with Sethic. So sure.
Yeah, 2 mana delete a card from your hand, sure.
Importantly, the Scorpid just played down here kind of challenges the Crush.
And also, more importantly, that is Southsea Scoundrel off the top, and Surrender did not tempo out this Holy Smite in order to keep his hand economy that little bit lower. So at 9 cards now, right, he is under threat of overdrawing one of those 3 Cthulhu pieces still in his deck.
But Alan instead is valuing keeping the Crush healthy. I'm a bit surprised to not see the opportunity for overdraw taken there.
Same. I mean, we of course have to mention what we learned clearly in the previous series of Southsea Scoundrel to steal Cthulhu, because now Alan has that possibility because the Priest is now playing Cthulhu as well. Especially as Priest has less ability to instantly draw the Cthulhu, because obviously Alan went for the play of shuffle it, draw it straight away with the Outrider's Axe. Now, however, he could get double Cthulhu this game. Maybe that's the way that you overcome the extra fatigue that he's taking in this matchup.
That's true. 60 damage is a lot to have to get through, even if you are a lot less deep in fatigue. I'll be keeping a close eye on this Southsea Scoundrel in the near future. As for now, Surrender It doesn't really have the cleanest way of dealing with this crush. I don't think this is the cleanest Sethic turn either because of hand space issues. So it's gonna be Infusion and then Smite to get rid of the crush entirely. And that overwrites the Outrider's Axe with the Turtle Spike, which is kind of a big deal if Alan was looking to continue drawing towards Cthulhu slash immediately draw Cthulhu the turn it's shuffled into the deck.
That's very true. There are no more Outriders axes, right? So again, the ability to create and then draw Cthulhu instantly is somewhat diminished, and so, or massively so for that matter, apologies. And so Surrender will potentially, if he gets his own extra South Sea Scoundrel, would be able to rip the Cthulhu from his opponent's deck and play 2 of his own.
Alan's just at 87. Close. Sorry, it's just a laugh. Okay, second piece for Surrender.
Ping
Feels
body.
like a pretty decent turn. Just ping and play the body. Potentially even Condemn to get another card out of hand because it looks like Surrender's leading up to a Sethic turn next turn.
I wonder.
I don't think the Condemn is being held for anything in particular at this point. Alan doesn't have threats, he just has the looming threat of Cthulhu.
Absolutely.
Okay, gonna dump Shadow Form instead of the Condemn. And which means he's not even playing the body at all. Okay.
Yeah. Ooh, there's Alan's body, and it's looking hella thick right now. Cthulhu shuffled into the deck. Surrender, of course, does now have the opportunity to discover it if he finds South Sea Scoundrel of his own. But it has to come soon, because this Cthulhu is going to be drawn in a very timely fashion, you would imagine.
Oh!
Ooh.
Okay, well, you'd have to imagine when Alan draws Cthulhu, he is windmill slamming it right away, so it's tough to maneuver Mutinous in a way that it actually defeats Cthulhu. But even if it eats just South Sea Scoundrel, that's a pretty big deal because Alan was holding us for what we think is the potential to get a second Cthulhu.
That's very true. That's very, very true.
In the meantime, I think Surrender will prioritize just dealing with the 6/6 though, which at the moment is not the easiest proposition. He hovered over Sethic to maybe find an answer there, but even if it's like Ysera Dream, I don't hate that.
If you're going to go Ysera Dream, I would kind of argue you're supposed to go Ysera Nightmare Dream, weirdly enough, just because you want to keep your... you cast Nightmare on the 6/6 as well and then Dream it back, just because you want to keep your card hand size low. Again, you know there's another South Sea Scoundrel waiting to come through, and you still have 2 Cthulhu pieces in the deck, right? He's only played Heart and he has body in hand, and so I do really like this line he's taking of just making sure he's that little bit less likely to overdraw a Cthulhu piece if the South Sea Scoundrel comes down.
Yeah, very good spot. I was thinking like Nightmare could be held for a Sethic turn, but keeping the hand at 8 cards is just too important. Like, South Sea Scoundrel has added such another complicated layer to already what was a difficult matchup to kind of toe the line between getting maximum value of your cards and not overdrawing. And so I do think the Nightmare throwaway was optimal there for Surrender. Another Brawl discovered for Alan, probably not doing that much, but the other options were kind of garbage as well.
There's some funky lines here for Surrender. There's the possibility of going for double Renew potentially to find Raise Dead, to try and hit the second South Sea Scoundrel, because then you could overdraw your opponent a card. But even without going that deep, just straight up one South Sea Scoundrel allows you to draw Cthulhu, but obviously then your opponent gets to play their Cthulhu. So how afraid of you are you of giving your opponent that Cthulhu? Can you set up a board where you just survive the turn even if they play the Cthulhu?
Consider.
You can survive, but then it's really hard to heal back from that point. I also feel like the renews for Raise Dead exactly to get Scoundrel is a little bit too ambitious. I feel like if Surrender had any game plan prior to this turn, he's probably just sticking to it, which I would assume is his own Cthulhu piece, probably Condemn to get rid of the poison, and then ping, go from there. It's still more health on board that survives against a potential Cthulhu.
Oh, but what if you get the Cthulhu? Like, you're having Sarah on board, so it's never going to kill you, right? And then you have double renew. You have your own Cthulhu afterwards. Oh, I don't know, man.
Like, how do you get the scout? And it's so hard to get raised that exactly from your new. I don't know.
Well, I mean, not even the raised dead plan. Just like play Salty Scoundrel, get yourself Cthulhu.
Oh, okay. I think that's a bit scary. Just in terms of, like, it's not that Alan would have to play it immediately, right? If you give it to him that turn.
Well, if he doesn't, then you mutinous and you try and eat it.
But then there's other things in hand. I don't know.
Oh.
That is definitely the right reaction from both of us. Just, priest. Okay, back on track. Runway Blackwing, pretty clean here. I'm just interested in presenting the most health on board every single turn to play around Cthulhu as best as possible. This also has the added benefit of immediately killing the Stonewall Anchorman.
No master.
I'm just honestly unsure why Surrender hasn't played his own body of Cthulhu where he has had multiple turns to do it. Is he afraid of completing his own Cthulhu because Alan's held on to one South Sea Scoundrel?
I mean, he still has 2 pieces left to go, right? He's not completing it anytime soon.
So weird. But we are down to just 4 cards for Alan. Mutinous still waiting in the wings. Surrender knows there's at least 1 more minion in hand because of the Cthulhu's body that he dreamed back.
Is Alan playing Mutinous in his list?
He's not.
Oh, sorry, you meant Surrender's Mutinous. Oh, apologies,
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that Surrender knows that, say, if Cthulhu were drawn for Alan right now and he slammed his Mutinous, it's not guaranteed to get Cthulhu because there's at least 1 more minion. And this turn starts to get very awkward because, like, the Scoundrel is still not overdrawing Alan. But this is the crossroads.
Oh my god, he did it.
I think this is a more reasonable position to do it because he sticks 14 health to the board. Potentially even the Laughing Sister, but feel like that might be overkill.
Well, I mean, admittedly, with my line, he's 17 health on the board because there was still Ysera in play after you condemned the Scorpid. But sure, the point still stands.
And so Alan's just thinking, all right, Cthulhu to face right now puts Surrender at 13.
Right.
Not great.
Not great.
So he's trying to remove damage before he plays Cthulhu, but we are in that situation now where Cthulhu's just sat in hand unplayed, and so Mutinous can potentially chomp a chomp chomp.
It's a straight up 1 in 3 to literally eat a god. Like, how big is this fish? Oh my goodness, he's doing it.
Oh my god, I can't look! Oh, he got the 1 in 3!
No way!
Nom nom.
Cthulhu Calamari.
I'm almost out of cards.
Yeah, Alan's lost.
That's just it, right? He just dies in fatigue.
Yeah, he's deeper in fatigue, can't offset this damage, and can't, like, magically generate 29 against Surrender. Not that it's just 29, there's 2 renews in hand. I didn't think it would pan out this way.
So now Surrender just never finishes his own Cthulhu, right? Because that would allow Alan to discover the Cthulhu from his deck. Like, he already has 1 Cthulhu that he stole from Alan.
And 1 is plenty when Surrender himself is 6 cards higher up in fatigue.
Like, even approaching 100 health potentially gained this game. Still not enough.
And for Surrender, I think it's fine to just slam it right now. Like,
oh, yeah.
It clears the 6/6. Gets to push another 10. Okay. If he's heading for a Sethek trade next turn, then I guess the discounts are quite strong. But basically, no matter what point he plays the Cthulhu, he's just winning because the fatigue is going to stack up quickly for Alan, and the armor will be negated by Cthulhu.
Yeah, I guess the consideration is bulwark. Like, if you're not concerned with the body of the actual 6/6 that Cthulhu gives you, then just chewing through all 4 charges in one swoop is pretty nice.
Yeah, fair enough. Taking the plague so he can ping away the 6/6.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Look at Mutinus's eyes. Golden arm. Oh, gross. But it's
Mutinus
so
has
good.
no idea what's going on. He has no idea what he just ate.
Tastes like chicken. It was an old god?
Oh yeah. Yep, there it is, in all its glory. It's been much hypothesized over, this Mutinous. Still, the jury is out as to whether or not it belongs in most Hearthstone decks. But here for Surrender, that fish is the absolute MVP, the absolute GOAT.
He's a fish and a goat and a murloc and a god eater. It's just an amalgam with all the minion types. Surrender just going through his own deck tracker now. It's not the pen and paper notes, but just making sure he's not missed anything. I don't believe any of these cards from Alan were generated, so technically Surrender can have full Sorry, maybe the Brawl was generated. He did take an extra one. So in terms of scariest possible spell from Scorpid, I guess like Athletic Studies into Dark Moon Rab. I don't know. There's just nothing.
Yeah.
Warcash maybe is what Surrender's thinking about as the one way he might possibly lose, but even then, I don't see what 3 cards off of Warcash can offset this fatigue that's ticking in and the 30 damage from Cthulhu and Surrender having Sethic double renew.
And at the end of it all, Alan had a bad beat the last couple of games against Priest, make no mistake, but this is what can happen when you bring an anti-priest strategy. Not to say that it was bad at all, but he's done it for a few weeks now with a very high amount of success. I've liked his game plan a lot, but you do eventually run into situations like this. Priest pulls off some nonsense, and especially as we saw with Mutinous shuffled into the pool as well. It's just a little bit of extra disruption that makes it that much harder to be able to execute your own game plan and go for the full anti-priest strategy. And this Control Warrior, as cool as it is, as much as I love the innovation from Alan, relatively speaking, compared to most of the field here, it's just not quite consistent enough against the greedier Control Priests.
Not to say that Surrender even needed his own Cthulhu to seal this game in the bag. And he had that win condition. You could say that the Control Warrior made a lot of sense maybe last week, before Mutinous was even in the card pool, as a way to defeat this type of game plan from Alan. And then you can also make the argument that Mutinous pulling Cthulhu from my hand is very unlikely to happen as long as they keep a couple more minions in there. But it has that built-in failure rate, right? And if you are going to bring a lineup that pretty much has no good matchups other than Priest, then you do run this risk. And we're going to be seeing this story a lot in the other regions as well. There's Control Warriors that have double OTK potential with the Soulbound Ashtongue on top of Cthulhu game plan. And we'll see if Priest can still stand up to that test, but something tells me it can, Derek. There's a reason why most people have been banning it. It's because they can generate all this nonsense to deal with even the hard target lineups.
That's right. In the kind of APAC practice group with a couple of the other Americas players in there as well, that Prancing Pony is set up. He makes kind of characters for the different styles that you can go for as your lineup building, where you either bring Priest and ban Priest, bring Priest and leave up Priest. And Alan is the lone... well, he names the characters after characters from Chrono Trigger, so he's the lone Shala, whereas everyone else is Chrono, in APAC at least this week.
Sorry, he just got double scoundrel as well. Like, I mean, obviously it's not relevant anymore, but that would have been so funny a couple turns ago. They're still pretty relevant as 4-mana 5/5s here.
I mean, I would have given... I don't know I would have given a lot of money to see Raised Dead Cthulhu there just for a world first. That would have been so sick, but I suppose the scoundrels will do.
One for me, one for you.
Close enough.
One for me, one for you.
Surrender not letting rip with the Sethic, just in case Alan has somehow managed to generate War Cash into some big minion that Surrender might need some big emergency answer to. He's under zero pressure here.
Yeah, it's just a lock. I don't see any possible avenue whatsoever for Alan to get his way back into the game. The strategy, again, that I've said he's been employing for a while now does look like it's finally met its match, given that Priest is just it's just too flexible now. It has too much disruption in addition to its standard, already cemented, extremely strong tempo/control game plan.
Happened twice today already. I mean, in two different fashions, where the Priest has managed to pull some crazy tricks out of its arsenal. And look at this. Wait.
Sorry. No.
Did I say something funny?
Carry on. No.
No, you tell me what's going on. What was so funny, Dark?
Oh, pulled out of his arsenal. Like, I mean, never mind.
Okay.
One for the boys, pal.
Sorry. I don't pronounce that word like that, but...
Either way, for Surrender now. Eye of Cthulhu finally being found. Again, I think he still has one more Cthulhu piece, but again, you just don't play it. You don't give them the possibility of discovering your Cthulhu thanks to their South Sea Scoundrel, and you will win the game.
Mm-hmm. It kind of harkens back to a couple of turns ago where Surrender had been holding onto the body of Cthulhu for super long, where we were hypothesizing why would he not play it because he still had other pieces to not play. Maybe he just wanted to eke out the value, just treating it as another minion where in a fatigue matchup, if there's no reason to pressure against your opponent, just don't give them targets to actually deal with. At this point, though, the Eye of Cthulhu is absolutely a must not play until it's lethal. Which it probably will be
yes.
next turn.
No, absolutely. Given that it's 4 damage now, 5 next turn. Unless the Bulwark comes down now, which I think it pretty much 100% has to stay alive. Or maybe you can get away with one more turn? Okay.
So Alan's going to take 5 fatigue damage next turn, so he's essentially at 10. So Surrender can remove the Drake and Eye and Hero Power, which would still be 1 off, but it's fine. No rush whatsoever. Okay, that's a way to kill off the Drake. Fit in another ping. Next turn, Eye and Hero Power should deal the lethal.
Yeah, even with Bulwark, because the Eye will just chew through all the charges of it, right? I think Alan really just praying for a monstrous misplay from Surrender to have any chance left whatsoever, as he knows better than we do, if anything, how slim his chances are.
And to even be aware of what that misplay could be, not to say that he necessarily thinks Surrender will go for it, but let's say there's some momentary lapse in judgment. That is what we were talking about, Surrender completing his own Cthulhu and then Alan discovering it off the Scoundrel. But we're going to see no misplays of the sort because Surrender has been hyper aware this entire time of how to play around that, and that means that Alan does not manage to get the win against Priest, and Surrender moves up with a flawless victory to face Glory in the decider match.
Commiserations, of course, to Alan. I think he has shown miraculous or drastic, I will say, improvement over the last season. He's had a lot more time to commit to Grandmasters, and that has shown. His level of play has been impeccable throughout, and his lineup decisions, I think, for the most part, have been very strong. But this week, with the inclusion of Wailing Caverns, it's difficult to predict in such a short amount of time how things can go. And again, I think if we could play this out a few more times, he would have a better win rate than was demonstrated here this weekend. But he's met his match. The Priest's too versatile and too likely to take a win win, even if you full tech against them. But Surrender, what a turnaround since a couple of weeks ago. My goodness, sending out what almost felt like a resignation tweet saying, you know, this could be the end of the run here for Grandmasters. It's been a great road. And then avoiding relegation, going to playoffs after finishing second place overall last week against Possessi. It has been such a turnaround, and now one game away from going through to the semi-finals and potentially being a representative of the World Championship yet again.
Much impressive stuff. Watching that game play out